Hello everyone and welcome to Return to Writing. I am Christina D and this is my channel. Because I have no real actual intro. So, one thing I have been doing a lot lately, especially since it is spooky season, I am talking about things like different genres. And today, talking about something that is very popular in horror, at least nowadays. So, let's talk about a common fear, and that is clowns. Which is a fun one for me to talk about because, hi, I am someone who, as a child, had some pretty serious coulrophobia. That is a fear of clowns. Now I am basically over that. I just don't trust clowns. At least not, like, clowns. Like, I mean, I trust them, I do and I don't. They're too chipper and in your face in some places. So, not the biggest clown fan, let's say that. But I do like a lot of horror content that involves clowns, oddly enough, which is very interesting. And also, thinking back on it, I had a fear of clowns as a kid, but I also watched shows like Big Comfy Couch. Loved it. You know, a show where all of the characters are clowns. But let's talk about clowns in horror. I feel like when it comes to clowns, it's something that you either like or you don't. There really is no in between. Some people think it's ridiculous that people are afraid of clowns. Other people understand the fear because they have the fear. Or are at least somewhat weirded out by them. It's kind of like when people say they're afraid of dogs or insert animal name here. To a lot of people it sounds stupid, but to the people that have the fear it makes sense. In some cases it's an irrational fear, which I would say mine was kind of an irrational fear. I do have a theory to where my fear of clowns came from, but I still don't know if that's really where it came from, because I can't really pinpoint where it started. But for some it's an irrational fear, for some there is a connection, a spark that started the fear. So why do we fear clowns? Why is this a thing? Because I recently was watching a video, it was a Try Guys video, where they were staying at the Clown Motel, and one thing that kept coming up was Stephen King. It was a mention of Stephen King and how he was the one to really spark this fear. Almost like saying Stephen King is truly to blame. But it got me thinking of, did he really? It's like, how far back does the fear of clowns go? Because clowns are something that have existed for many years, in many cultures, in various forms. It's like even long before Stephen King. So let's break down a clown, or just a typical clown that we see in media. We have a person, typically makeup on their face, painted smile, either painted nose or a fake nose on. They are usually dressed very outlandish, very over the top. They are usually very cheerful. Some are in your face, which is part of why I don't really like clowns. I don't really like the in-your-faceness of some clowns. But then you also do kind of have, like, the sad clowns. You do have those clowns out there. Those clowns I dig. I can relate. I like the sad clowns. It's like they're often more chill. It's like they're kind of like the clowns that don't want to be perceived, but are there to be perceived and be the butt of the joke. But they are often seen as almost separate beings in a sense. Like they're almost their own species of human, weirdly. Which I think maybe it kind of falls into the uncanny valley. Like maybe that's something that's at play here, because they do have the painted face. Like you recognize them as human because the people portraying them are. But there's something about it that feels artificial, that feels not real. So maybe it is kind of dipping into the uncanny valley. Especially since, while there are clowns that speak, there are a lot that are more pantomime, that are more silent. So I feel like that combination of that visual sense of uncanniness maybe combines into that silence, because then you have a lack of communication, a lack of a verbal communication. I feel like that kind of leads into something that I found sort of researching, sort of just me looking for things to watch. And I found this one episode of, I think it was like One Step Beyond. Let's see. Yeah, One Step Beyond. And it was literally an episode called The Clown. And at first it was sort of just like the clown is just misunderstood. They're being framed for something that they didn't do, which, I mean, they were. But then it kind of turns into this sort of like psychological yet possibly like metaphysical as like paranormal thing. And it becomes, I mean, to spoil the episode, this clown sort of haunts this person that was connected to this woman he was basically framed for killing. And he sort of like literally haunts him. Like in reflections, you see him going to like go after him. And at first you think, oh, this is in his head. This dude is feeling guilty for what happened. And then it gets to the end where this guy is so paranoid that he goes out into this bridge that's over water, and he looks into the water and sees this clown in the reflection of the water going after him, and he falls over into the water. Keep in mind, at this point, the clown itself is in his trailer. He is locked in his trailer. He has not physically moved from the scene of the crime. But when we cut back to the clown, because this dude is being attacked in water, when we cut back to the clown, he is completely soaked. So it's just like, was that actually all in this guy's head? Was the clown just like projecting himself out into the ether to go after this guy for what actually happened? And it really just sort of like create a fear of this character, of this clown, of, oh, this is like a being, not necessarily a person in a costume. Which I feel like adds to, again, that uncanny thought of, this looks human, but is it really? Like, there's a little bit of that, like, fight or flight that comes into play. Now, going back to what I said about Stephen King being typically seen to be blamed as the reason clowns are so scary, that's because while we do have the modern It movies, the two-parter, originally it was released as a miniseries back in the 90s. Like, we have the original miniseries that has been combined into a movie. I know, I watched it all the time on VHS. But that's typically what cemented it. Like, that was the original It that cemented Pennywise as the horror clown. Now, that, on the other hand, that came out in, what was that? The miniseries, I think, was the 90s? Yeah. Got my phone. Keeping myself on track. Now, that came out in the 90s, but keep in mind, this is a Stephen King movie we're talking about. It's based on one of his books. The book came out in 86. But that still wouldn't explain why something like One Step Beyond would exist, because One Step Beyond is very much a Twilight Zone-esque series. That came out in the 60s. So clearly, Stephen King isn't necessarily where this horror media... Sorry about that. While I have lost my train of thought due to outside noise... This is what happens when you record this at home. Clearly, the fear of clowns goes far beyond just Stephen King, because if One Step Beyond has an episode where the clown is a focus and turned into this sort of entity rather than a person, clearly this is something that has existed far beyond just Stephen King. And you see it even in movies prior to the adaptation of Stephen King's book, It. Like with things like Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I love Killer Clowns from Outer Space, but even then, there's sort of an emphasis that it's not a person in a costume, because even in It, it's not a person. It's something posing as a clown. And in Killer Clowns from Outer Space, they are aliens from outer space. They are not human. So there is sort of this sense that clowns aren't actually human, that they are something posing as human or humanoid. And even in just like children's media, or media for like teens, like if you look at an episode of The Haunting Hour, for example, there was literally one about a kid who is born into a family of clowns, who, when he hits a certain age, truly becomes a clown. He takes on his clown form, and the human persona is the alter ego. Like, that's their cover-up to blend in with humanity. So again, there's this emphasis on clowns not being people, but something else. Something living among us. Now, outside of media, there are the very real cases of clowns and people dressed as clowns committing various crimes and very not good things, and I'm not going to go in depth on that because I'm very much specifically talking about horror, but But that definitely adds on to clowns being seen as something to be afraid of. And I mean, even with things like the Joker in Batman, the various iterations of the character. He is the clown prince of crime. He is seen as a bad guy. He's not seen as something good and happy. Or even in Are You Afraid of the Dark? Zeebo the Clown. That episode scared me as a kid. Even though watching back it's very not scary. But Zeebo the Clown. A ghost clown that is haunting people from beyond the grave, supposedly. There very much is this emphasis that clowns are not good. And while it is very much a modern thing, there is also, again, this balance of what horror possibly has created from it versus how people typically see clowns outside of horror. Because outside of horror, you have clowns in circuses, clowns at parties, clowns face painting, clowns at different events. They are meant to be these characters that bring joy, make people happy, make people laugh. They are there to entertain. But it makes me wonder if clowns in horror are supposed to be creating horror from something otherwise innocent, or are emphasizing something that already exists as a fear in people. Because again, as I said earlier, it's very much an irrational fear for a lot of people. There are a lot of people like me who didn't know where it stemmed from. Even though, again, I kind of have a theory that it might be from The Sims with the sad clown portrait and the social clown that would show up if your sim didn't interact with enough people. That was a whole thing. Part of me thinks that might be where it came from, but I still can't completely pinpoint whether or not that was it. But a lot of people, it's an irrational fear. They don't know why. Because, again, this is something that, for many people, is harmless. Clowns are entertainment. They are fun. They are chipper. But there's just something people can't pinpoint when it comes to the irrational fear that causes them to be afraid. That causes them to question whether or not clowns can be trusted, or whether this is a safe person or being to be around. Like, and even when clowns aren't the main focus as, like, being seen as different entities or being seen as a villain, they are still very much part of horror stories, even just as a distraction. Because, I mean, look at the clown doll in Poltergeist. That technically wasn't even a main thing. It was just a prop that ended up creating scares. That definitely cemented a scare for me as a kid. I remember that. Or if you go to the urban legend route, the clown statue, that is a big urban legend. I remember hearing a lot. So while this really isn't a full deep dive into clowns in general, as far as clowns in horror and media go, I feel like it is very much just, it comes back to that uncertainty, that uncanniness of clowns. Because while realistically we know real clowns are just people in costumes, there is that external, that visible layer with the costume itself and the makeup and everything else that goes into creating the clown. That creates a sense of uncanniness. It creates this character that we see as artificial and not real, thus sort of turning it into an entity rather than a person, rather than something we recognize as a person or as human. Which is why I think we do see clowns in horror very often times as aliens, as separate species, as these sort of metaphysical beings that can project themselves in One Step Beyond. I think it's not necessarily we're taking something that's innocent and friendly to others and making it scary. It's sort of pulling and playing on the existing fear itself and the existing concerns and uncertainty that already exists for a lot of people who have a fear of clowns, or especially an irrational fear of clowns that are trying to dissect it, because it is sort of just dipping into uncanny. It's not complete uncanny valley. We can accept that they are a thing and that they exist and they can interact and we can interact with them, but at the same time, it dips enough into it that we don't see them as one of us, but as something else. And I feel like that kind of turns into almost like an Invasion of the Body Snatchers kind of deal, where it's just it's something among us, something living among us. They are the imposter. It's that uncertainty and that uncanniness that really creates that fear. And I think that's really why clowns are seen as, and have been seen as, scary and as part of horror media, even going back into the 60s and earlier, probably. Because there's something extra about them. There's something else about them. They are over the top. And in some cases, like with Killer Clowns from Outer Space, quite literally out of this world. So if you guys liked the video, I hope you give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, subscribe. If you want to support me, there are links to 2 different shops in the bio, because I have started up a 4th wall, which hopefully I will be transitioning most of my designs from my main shop over to this new 4th wall shop right now. As of recording this video, there are 3 items up: a bucket hat, a t-shirt with an illustration I made based on my book, or one of the stories in my book, Dark Pine Tales of Terror. And it even has like a little illustration, I think it's on the right sleeve if I remember correctly, that is an illustration that can be found in the book, actually. And then another one that is another illustration that can be found in the book. So, you want to support me like that, links to that are below. Links to my Buy Me a Coffee, where you can get my bi-monthly zine, are also in the description below. Same with my Patreon. If you want to sort of like create a community, I do have a subreddit. I am also on Tumblr as nanoficto92. And I will see you guys whenever the next video is, because I do not have an upload schedule.